Hola, ¿qué tal? Voy a hablar en español.
Hello, I'm going to speak in Spanish. I am a psychologist, a humanistic psychotherapist. I have my private office and also in the integrational support services at ICEERS. I want to present some work that I've been developing privately at a personal level, and it has to do with eating disorders. I'm going to present this paper, this work that I have just started, and it has to do with information gathering, information collection. I'm going to describe a couple of interviews, and there are 3 more that are yet to be analyzed. So let me share with you that this is my intention. I want to share with you this information about this evidence that seems to point to the fact that with indigenous traditional medicine, we can do something about eating disorders. The outbreak is spontaneous. This means when I was 14, I was diagnosed with severe anorexia nervosa. I was admitted twice, once when I was 15. They said I would only live for 2 more weeks because I was not eating at all. Then I became suicidal and I was admitted into an organization another time. And I'm sharing this with you just to set the context and to explain the fact that for me, in my experience, it is very important that everything that has to do with indigenous traditional medicine comes after a process with a practice that has to do with psychotherapy and clinical psychology. That is my point. So treating eating disorders, eating habit disorders, because the person is so weak, the body is absolutely fragile, and the disorder itself may be so severe, as I experienced it myself, that I nearly died. And I would say it's a contradiction to start the other way around. It's my view, and that is what I wanted to share with you. And having said this, against this backdrop, let me present my study. I followed another diet. I've been taking the plants for some years now. So after my second diet, I self-analyzed myself, and I answered a 24-item interview, and I would like to explain this to you. Oh, here you can see. There you go. Here you can see the 3 main eating disorders: anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating. Anorexia nervosa has a uniqueness, which is food restriction, fear to gaining weight, and the other 2 disorders, well, they involve binge eating, and the great difference is that with bulimia you have the compensatory behaviors, which don't occur in the case of binge eating, but the person feels guilty, deeply ashamed, so the person has total self-rejection. Now, when I designed this interview myself, I thought from the very beginning that an eating habit disorder was not a pathology, or I wanted to analyze it from a different perspective as an experiential, personal, holistic process, as the indigenous cosmovision would think of it. And that is how it all started. History behind eating disorders. These disorders, they say, arise ever since we became aware of the fact that we are humans. Let me just say that I found information that together with witch hunting, there was anorexic hunting in history. So here is the history behind anorexia nervosa, dating back to the 16th hundreds. the 16th century, the disease of the virgins, a German doctor would call it, a French psychiatrist called it the hysterical anorexia. And in the 20th century, we have two interesting books that I stress here. Saint Anorexia by Rudolf Bell. They talk in some books about the relationship with women, and we can go back to the 13th and 14th century, because some women would say that they would kill themselves in hunger to become pure and to offer their pain to God. And Sylvia Frendick, she relates anorexia with culture. It's very interesting, her book, I think, and she argues that the female bodies are healthy or sick carriers of something that transcends them, and it has to do with cultural messages, family issues that the youngster that suffers from it has no idea about, and that is very important. That's very important to take into account because of what I am going to be explaining in a minute about bulimia nervosa. I found information that locates it back in the Roman times, where there were those feasts with really binge eating. They forced themselves to vomiting, to continue eating, and those banquets. Then Galenus, the first researcher of all the times, talked about this kinosorexia, and this has to do with anorexia, but also located at the time, and I thought it was more consistent, because a case of a woman who died because of anorexia nervosa was reported, or something similar to anorexia nervosa. And then eating disorders are first identified in 1968, I mean, included in the DSM, and the current DSM-5 calls them food disorder, eating disorders, and food intake disorders. It's important to mention this because apparently these are disorders that go really way back in time. This is a condition that's silent still. I mean, not as much as 30 or 20 years ago, but it's quite silent. However, it's widespread and it's complex. The morbidity rate is 1 person every 62 minutes. Estimate relapse rate of 40% after having undergone traditional Western treatment, clinical psychology and psychiatry, very important therapies, but even if very important and fundamental, and still 40% relapse rate. That's quite impressive. And here in Catalonia, the disorders are increasing, not just in Catalonia, but also elsewhere. Here in Catalonia, they are the third chronic disease suffered by adolescents and teenagers, with the prevalence rate of 11 to 16% in their milder forms, and we find more and more cases of girls before adolescence, and also adult women and elderly women, and more men. This is not just something to do with women only. Binge eating disorders is really increasing, really growing. Let me share with you the questions that I asked 2 of my patients. Let me also explain. This is an interview because I did my screening following a series of criteria. They could take a look on their symptoms, and then they self-assessed whether they could or not respond to the 24 items in the interview, 24 questions in this case. So about the symptoms, what is it I found? In general, for these 2 women, in this case, the 2 of them were ayahuasca users. One of them in particular quite a heavy ayahuasca user. The other one had attended maybe 2 ceremonies. I'm still on it, you know. This is still underway, so that's why I'm explaining this like that. One of them also was a smoker. After the latest intake, until 10 days after, they found that their symptoms were reduced in general. Physical activity had decreased. Their relation with food and healthy nutrition and conscious nutrition, that is what they feel. Both of them had undergone psychiatric and clinical and psychological therapy before, and then they decided to take ayahuasca to go deeper into their process. Their self-esteem grew, and they heard the voice of the eating disorder because of this dissociation that's very characteristic of these disorders. Then, something remarkable. The two of them would assert that this experience of being themselves and living in themselves and their body, that has changed radically. That is one of the things that they could identify clearly, both of them, and that is encouraging because these disorders imply this, entail that the person doesn't want to be in her body because it's disgusting to her. So this idea of feeling closer to the body and the environment, that's very important. About the trauma, I asked whether they were able to connect with the trauma, you know, what's underneath an eating disorder. Apparently, and I've read this and I've read about ayahuasca in general, one of them had relived some of these traumas, the other one hadn't. Amount of trauma, the amount of ayahuasca had a lot to do, was directly proportional with this fact of connecting to the trauma. About bonds and intra-uterus experiences, they were able to connect with the mother and the father, especially with the mother, and the feelings were of reconciliation, another meeting, a new connection, forgiveness. Also with the grandparents, they had connected, and one of them had intra-uterine experiences, memories, and they both had something in common: bulimia and anorexia nervosa. In general terms. In general relationships, they reported that they were more aware, they were more conscious, in the sense that they had become more flexible vis-a-vis their social relationships. One of them realized that she was able to open up more with other people and become closer to other people. Very relevant and very important. About their understanding about their own disorder, they replied, yes, absolutely yes. They became aware of their disorder. Sylvia Frederick said, the author, in the beginning, that she would find in anorexia nervosa lack of knowledge. You know, the girls didn't know what was going on with them. They just couldn't understand. And actually, to this question, they replied, yes, definitely, I can understand what it means to kill myself in hunger. These processes have been accompanied, in combination, remember, with psychiatry and psychotherapy, especially psychotherapy sessions. About the current personality, I asked them, have you been able to connect with your healthy self, your healthy side that's so difficult to achieve when you are under the disorder? They said yes, both of them, and both of them said that they were now able to connect with their own shades, and they could include this part within their personality that they started to rebuild after the process, after the eating disorder, about transcendence and spirituality. Another change that is worthwhile mentioning was the fact that they reconnected with their femininity, their capabilities in terms of health and nutrition and healing, just like they became aware of the disorder per se. They became aware of all this, and that was very good. They got to know more about their body, and they felt connection with love, giving and receiving love, and they felt that they were able to connect to something much, much bigger, something that was contributing something healthy. Remember Rudolf Bell, those saints, etc., regardless of your religion, those blessed, devout people, so this connection with God. They're not Catholics, these two women, by the way, but they felt that the spiritual part of the story was now part of their life as well, and it's something worthwhile noticing, because it was remarkable, as they put it. They felt greater connection with nature, also with the sense of feeling of belonging, sense of tribe and community, which is quite encouraging in the context of eating disorders. And when I asked them both, would you be willing to be born again, both of them said yes, they would be willing to be born again. So I'm halfway through my project, and that's all I can share with you for the moment. Let me just say that, well, this is just a push that, hopefully will help me continue with the studies. Anja is here somewhere. She has conducted a study also about eating disorders. I strongly recommend you read it if you have the chance. And I'm really eager to continue doing my research along those lines. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you.